All right. So, my name is Rush Lilaviva, and I am the tabletop director at DragonCon for our panels. I don't run the gaming, but I run the panels that have to do with gaming and our various guests that show up to talk about their wonderful hobby that we all share. With me is Dallan Elk. Dallan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Dallan Elk. I'm a junior at Paul Duke STEM High School, and I have been DMing for some 6, 7 years at this point, and I am now trying to join Rush and kind of discuss how to further mine and everybody's around me enjoyment within the game of D&D. I also run a some 30, 40 player D&D club at my school, and I'm trying to learn how we best control or rather dial in some of those more crazy players that make the game somewhat punitively arbitrary, if you will.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. I like that use of that word. Um, so don't go too far. I mean, we don't want it like a 15-minute story, but what's an example of a game or something that you've run where it's gone off the rails?
Sure. Very simply put, I had a one shot where I was kind of having the players deal with a wild magic encounter, and if you watched the last video, you know that a lot of my one of my core pieces of my game is the tavern. I always have my players start at the tavern. It just makes it easier for me. But there was a very obvious lord that they were supposed to be talking to, and my players, being high schoolers, wanted to cause as much mischief as they possibly could. And so essentially, what they started to do was they tried to steal from the lord. The guards showed up, and then because they were in a tavern, they ran out into the back of the tavern, into the cellar, where, of course, all the alcohol was, and they set fire to the alcohol, caused a massive explosion. TPK, the entire session was over in the span of 7 minutes.
Wow.
Um, they burned down the tavern, and then I was like, okay, I don't really know what you want from me. This is all I got. Like, you've burned down the tavern. We could try again if you want, but you don't really have to. And then they were like, all right, we're out. And I was like, all right. They came back the next week, they did it again. And then they came back the next week and did it again.
Okay,
Um,
this is a great story. I love it. So just a few things. One, everybody's had that session. So if you guys are out there, anybody's watching this, if you've had that session and you feel like really down about it, everybody's had that session. Mine that was very similar was we had been playing D&D for a while, and these players were like, "Hey, we want to make evil characters. Can we make evil characters?" And I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And then of course that goes off the rails really, really fast because they're evil. They're like literally plotting against each other. They're trying to kill each other, and the session ended with all the characters with knives to each other's throats, literally, and they hadn't even teamed up. Like it was literally like
yeah.
a three-way standoff, and so it very much like what you said. It was a total disaster. So everybody's had that game, and it's okay. But what I think is also interesting about your story is that you said they came back the next week and the same thing happened. Came back the next week and the same thing happened. Okay. A couple things that might help, but may not possibly cure it because there sometimes there are deep seated reasons why something is happening in your game. But one session zero is really really important, right? And for those people who don't know, session zero is where you sit down and everybody makes their characters together. Um, that's very very important because at that point, when people are making their characters together, you can kind of set the tone for the game. And it's very important, in my opinion, to have a template for the initial party. So, for the longest time, for example, I would say, okay, everyone is a member of the military. Because if everybody's a member of the military, then you can literally be whatever alignment you want. You just have to take orders, and you have to do them. You might have your own agenda, but as long as you're doing what the military tells you to do, it's going to be fine. And they have a compelling reason to do what the military tells them to do, right? This is their job, and actually, if you don't do it, you're going to be thrown to prison. So, it during that session zero, you can set up expectations like, hey, this is the kind of game I'm trying to run. This is the basic plot, like you're going to be defending the village, or Strahd is going to be trying to kidnap somebody, and you have to deal with that. So you establish the basic storyline, and then finally, again, it's really helpful to have a strong template. So it doesn't have to be the military. A great campaign that I ran that was really fun was everybody had to play a halfling, and everybody had to be related somehow. So they were a cousin, a brother, a sister. They had to be related.
That makes for
Um,
really awkward love triangles.
no love triangles, although one of the player characters fell in love with a unicorn. Long story, but um, it was interspecies romance. But it doesn't have to be. So it could be military, it could be family. They're all part of the same thieves guild. You could do something like they're part of the wizards guild. They're all spellcasters. Something that has a reason that character A does not wander off to a whole different location than character B, and they don't care. That's the worst, right? If these
Mm-hmm.
characters wander off and they don't care what the other person is doing, yeah, of course, they're gonna wander off and do that because there's no compelling reason for them to be together. So there has to be a compelling reason that they need to be together. Okay, and then also, if people are making really chaotic or wild characters during that session zero, you can kind of sort of head that off at the pass. So that's all about the session zero. Another thing that you can really do when things start to go off the rails is you're always, well, okay, there's two minds about it. If I notice that the whole party is kind of going off the rails and everybody just wants to go crazy, then it's time to like literally stop the game and be like, um, is this what we want to do? Now, if it's like, that's what we want to do, we just want to run around and do Grand Theft Auto, that's actually okay as long as and there's an understanding. But if you, as the game master, didn't have that understanding, yeah, it's okay to stop the game and be like, whoa, 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 and don't be angry or mad, but just be like, what do we want to do? What's our objective? What Our objective here is to kind of cause chaos and destruction, or our objective is to go on an adventure. And if the answer is, well, yeah, we do want to go on chaos and destruction, maybe have one session of that. And then the next week say, okay, I'd like to try to do something different. What do you think? And then try to find a middle ground from there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Um, Finally, another really, really good piece of advice that I've found, especially with new players, because this really is something that happens with new players a lot, I find.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, that something that's really important is to in that session zero, or if you notice um some of the players don't quite get how role playing works, is to do a sidebar and kind of explain a few things. So a really good example would be, I had a first time player who came into the game, and she really saw it as a past the six kind of storytelling prospect, which is okay if that's the understanding, but it's not the understanding for most role playing games. So, for most role playing games, you are playing a character, and the only things you can do are described on your character sheet. So, that's the extent of your abilities. You can't, for example, say, well, now that I'm in trouble, I call out and I'm calling out to my mother who's a god. And you make that up on the fly, and
Yeah.
my mother is going to respond by sending down her angels to protect me. You can't do that in most role playing games. But this player didn't realize it. She was like, "Oh, I thought I could just make up my end of the story, and do whatever as I wish," which unfortunately doesn't work. It sounds cool, but doesn't work, because then, like, well, the angels show up to defend you, and these demons show up because they want to kill the angels. Well, now my dragon familiar comes flying out of the sky, and then the game becomes there's a joke on a podcast that I listen to, which is, I just flap my arms and fly away. Why not?
Yeah.
If anything goes, I just get out of there by flapping my arms and I fly away into the sky. So sometimes I've had when I have brand new players, I have to take a player or aside or maybe the whole table and just say, wait. There are limitations as to what you can do. Anything that you can do is on this sheet. That's it. You cannot rewrite your history. You can't rewrite the history of a place unless we talk about it ahead of time. Like if you say it would be really cool for me to be the daughter of a god, okay, but you can't do it spontaneously. Let's talk
Yeah.
about it. We can
Sorry about it. Balance it, make it realistic so that, like, if you're the daughter of a god and this other guy is just, a nobody with nothing, and he's just, he's built his character and he's playing like a ranger, which is objectively the most useless character in all of D&D. Like, they are severely underpowered here, and it's just not, they're no longer useful to the party in that sense.
right. You got it. So and then there's one more thing that you can do, um, which is let the consequences play out logically and then try to loop the character back in. One of the great examples, and I give this example all the time, was I was running a game for a bunch of people at a summer camp, and right next door, a good friend of mine was running it for another group, and that other group um, had the Grand Theft Auto syndrome. So one of the players went off and broke into some old lady's home and tried to rob her blind. So what was helpful is in D&D you start at level 1. So he goes in there, he's level 1, and he's fighting this old lady, and because he's level 1, he's not doing really well. And the old lady's actually doing damage to him, and like so he's getting beat by the old lady. And then finally he ends up running out of the house because stealing all this stuff from the house was not as cool as he thought it was going to be. Plus also he has to carry it, right? So how much can you realistically carry? You know.
Yeah.
Um and then he gets caught by the guards, and the guards put him in jail, and they're like, "Look, we can hang you, or you can go on this mission." And he chose to go on the mission, and then he kind of straightened up after that. So that was playing out the consequences and then slowly, carefully nudging him and looping him back into the story. And then the final thing that we've talked about and the last time was explaining, okay, if somebody really goes off the rails, like my son went on a murder spree in, in a game that we were playing, like a complete murder spree. I said, okay, look, you are welcome to do that because you have control of your character. You can go on a murder spree if you want, but what will happen is you will write yourself out of the campaign. We will need to run a separate campaign where you become a serial killer or a mass murderer, and the guards are pursuing you through town, and you're going to have to avoid the guards, and that's what the game will be about. But that's not what this game is about. So we'll play that later, a solo game, you and I, but that's not going to be part of this adventure. So that's cool if you want to do that. And he actually straightened up after that. But it's a real choice. Like if that's what you really want, you want to be a mass murderer, okay, it's just we're not going to do it right here now. So does that all make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, as I tell that to you, what do you think that any of those things would have? How would any of those things work with the people that you're dealing with that kind of go off the rails? How would that? What would?
I think probably the sessions zero would probably be the best approach. We never really had a session zero because it was a series of one shots. Because at the time, is probably the best word for it. But I think having a for a legitimate campaign, I think a session zero is probably one of the most important things. That probably would help the majority of people, and probably me too, in terms of avoiding that head on. In terms of new players, which is what my D&D club personally is all about, uh, we starting this year are doing a month of newbie, which is a month where we have a 4 shot. It's actually a 3 shot, and then the fourth is kind of the session zero for the next campaign. So we give them pre-written characters, uh, and we say, "This is your character sheet. Here we go. Here's like the start of the campaign. The second part is like the role play. We teach them how to role play, how to spend gold, how to do all that fun stuff, be their character. And then the third is the boss fight, where we teach them about combat and we teach them about how all of that system works. And then the fourth is where we all take a deep dive into characters and we learn how to create characters. Um,
Wow. That's amazing. That's very organized. That's awesome. How have you done that yet?
we have not done that yet. That's our plan for this year. And
Okay.
so I'm hoping the idea behind that, when I kind of came up with that idea, was that that little role play section is where we would kind of get this GTA syndrome kind of out of the way, so that we can actually play some real D&D together.
Okay.
That's kind of the intention of that, is kind of a mini session zero, for new players that haven't actually played the game yet, and they don't really understand how to play D&D. You know, like, you roll this die for this and you roll this die for this, and it sounds really confusing until you actually sit down and play it, and it's actually unbelievably simple.
Okay, that's
And
another.
so I find
Okay.
that running a session zero for new players is really hard. So that's how I would do that, heading off that GTA syndrome.
That's interesting. Like you said about that session zero being kind of hard for new players. I have a question then.
Yeah,
I've found with new players, especially young people today, they can jump in a lot quicker because a lot of the concepts that are in RPGs are in computer games. All right,
yeah.
so you're nodding. So I usually don't have to describe how stats work and stuff like that, and usually they pick up in the role playing pretty quickly. Is that been your experience, or no? That sometimes they are you finding some people are not quite
My
there?
experience is that combat comes really easy to a lot of my players.
Sure,
Combat is the easiest thing.
sure.
Um, Role playing, however, they do not pick up very quickly at all,
Interesting.
if ever. Um,
Okay, interesting.
I know personally, I spent my first, what was it, 2 or 3 plays, like, not role playing a bit. I think the first ever time I ever actually role played was when I was actually playing with you, Rush.
Okay.
If you remember that one shot with the mind flare, I was playing this green dragon rogue, and I was quite chaotic. Um, that was the first time I had ever role played, and I had been playing D&D for like 3 years at that point. So yeah, I find that role playing and actually getting into a character's mind and becoming the character beyond just, I'm gonna burn the tavern down and I'm gonna rob the lord, um, is really, really hard for a lot of newer players, in my
So
experience.
that time in which we role played, what made you finally like make the leap into actually inhabiting a character? What was the difference there?
The difference was, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to be sitting down with a professional dungeon master and people who actually know what the crap they're doing. I have to actually play Dungeons and Dragons. Um, I think it was also the fact that it was like, okay, I've played Wizards my entire life. Oh, it's time to branch out and play a rogue. What would this, you know, dragonborn rogue do? And kind of just be like, okay, I've seen this, and this. Let's try this other random thing.
Okay, so part of what I'm hearing from you is one of the things that made you leap into role playing was the expectations were raised. That's what I'm hearing from you. Like, oh,
Absolutely.
this is a big
Yeah.
game. I really better bring it this time. I really, so any GM can do that at their table. You can raise those expectations through a session zero, and then also presenting the players with situations where they have to rise to the occasion. So any situation where the only really good solution is a social one. So, for example, you need to intimidate person X, you need to convince person Y, or This big group of bad guys are coming, and then you have to fool everyone into thinking that you're a great and powerful wizard. All those things require a social solution, so that if they require a social solution, then you have to role play to some extent. So that's where I would begin. Um, I remember for me when
Yeah.
I was much younger, that's how role playing started for us, because we were like, huh, there would be situations where we'd have to run into something, and then someone would have to, you know, the convince the king that we need help, for example, and um, if we didn't, we would fail the mission. And so I remember starting to role play at that point when I was much younger, because as soon as you're trying to convince somebody, you have to put on an act to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you initialize that to a group of new players as
Uh,
a
I would
GM?
I would definitely have that as part of the encounter. Like when I'm writing up my notes, usually I write up like three or four things that are going to happen in a scene, and they can happen in any order, and they can be initiated by anybody. But like I might go with here's a really good example. Here's something that really draws in people almost always: the murder, and you have to find out who murdered the person, and then people start looking around for clues, and they find clues, and now the clues point to, say, three different people, and you have to interview them. Well, now you have an excuse to talk to three different people, right? So, in fact,
Mm-hmm.
this I have a group of brand new players that's how I started it with. I said during our session zero, I said, "So, what do you think about like a murder mystery? Do you think that would work? Are you interested in that sort of thing?" And they said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." So, um, the the game opened up with a missing prince, and they had to interview people to talk about where the prince went. And then when they showed up, once they got in that mode, what was interesting, it kept rolling. They showed up and saw a bunch of goblins and captured the prince. And instead of just attacking the goblins, they tricked the goblins. So that extended the role play, because then it became a thing. Like, oh, okay, the social solution is the first thing we're going to reach for, not combat. So that's worked for me.
I have another question kind of on that line.
Mhm,
So I think there are definitely different types of players,
mhm.
in terms of players who will reach for the social solution and players who will reach for the combat solution. When kind of dividing up tables, right, in your ideal party, right, would you have kind of a blend of these combat oriented folks and these social oriented folks? Or would you rather have kind of a group who is very social oriented or very combat oriented so you can kind of know what way they're going and there's not all this disagreement and yada yada yada? What do you think would be better as a
Man,
GM?
that's a really interesting question. Because usually when I have a group, it's just a group of friends. And so because a group of friends is always made up of different personalities and people, they're gonna that group is always gonna want different things no matter what. Like everyone at the table will be looking for something different.
Hmm.
However, in your case, you have a huge pool of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh hmm.
And I have DMs like myself who are very combat oriented, and I have DMs like my friend Abby who are very, very roleplay oriented.
I honestly, I would group the role players together because I think they're going to have more fun, and I would group the combat people together because they're going to have more fun, because they're going to be everyone will be doing more of what they want to do. Now that doesn't mean that you can't mix them
I
around.
thought that might be the case.
Okay, but what?
Yeah, I thought that might be the case. I just wanted your opinion on that.
Well, let me know how it goes. I think that will work better.
I will. I will
But
absolutely.
but yeah, I'd be interested to know how that goes, or if it's a disaster, you know. But
But we'll definitely see.
yeah. So is that club running right now?
No, it's a school club, so it'll be running come August.
Okay, well that'll be very
Right
exciting.
now, I am. Yeah, right now I am actually gathering dungeon masters and starting to train up dungeon masters, which
That's
is a whole new topic in and of itself.
No, yes, I would love to talk about that. Like how you train up a dungeon master. That's kind of neat because I've certainly never done that. I mean, yeah, ever. It's always been about me, and then I trade notes with my fellow GMs who are peers. Uh,
Yeah.
so training up somebody to do all this, that would be very, very interesting to hear. So, any other questions about games that go off the rails or games that go wildly like off a tangent or that sort of thing?
Um, how do you make sure that your games do not become, as you put it, punitively arbitrary
Mhm.
while still not railroading the players?
That's a
How do you
yeah,
figure out that sweet spot?
man. That's a great, great, great question. Wonderful question. I think it depends on the GM and the group and your play style. I've known a GM who was a big time railroader, but they learned to loosen up and not stick everybody into a situation where A, B, and C has to happen, and it has to happen in this order, and there's not really anything you can kind of do. And that's the game I used to play in, and I felt it was like improv acting class where the teacher gives you a situation that you have to react to, but that's all I got to do was react to like this thing's happened, you have to react to it. Oh no, this thing's happened, you have to react to it. Oh, that's good. But I really could not affect the outcome of the story whatsoever. And so I didn't like that campaign, unfortunately. But that's how I survived that one. He learned to loosen up in time and let the players drive the story more and more. But at his heart, he's sort of like a more linear, more planned out game master. And I've seen game masters that are punitively arbitrary. They make everything up off the top of their head. And because of that, it comes all the way back around to being like a railroad because this person thinks it'll be a great idea that if everybody gets captured, that'll be really exciting that everyone gets captured. Um, so the situation pops up and nothing we can do can prevent our capture. Nothing. The bad guys always defeat the spells that we throw. Um, my cool strategies always fail, or they don't work quite the way that I want them to, and eventually we get overwhelmed and we get captured.
Yeah.
That's very frustrating as well. So the way you check yourself against that is um, you literally stop yourself every once in a while and go, okay, am I is this being driven by what I want to happen in the story, or is this being driven by a logical consequence? Right? You just check yourself. Kind of like being a parent, like when you get upset at your kid and you're punishing your kid, or like you can't, have your Nintendo for a week, and then you think about it for a minute, and you're like, that's kind of harsh. I think only a day is good enough. So you're constantly just checking yourself. Is what is happening because I want the story to unfold this way, or is what happening because this is what would happen? Um,
Yeah.
and that really, really helps me a lot, especially because sometimes the players do things that are pretty nasty and are pretty overwhelming. So, for example, if a venture party, like wipes out three of the bad guys' bases, the bad guy's not going to be really happy about that. And he's not going to send incompetent assassins. He wants to make sure that these people are dead. So the assassins he's going to send are really, really good, and they're going to be really, really nasty. And when that happens, I honestly go to the players and right before an encounter happens, I'll apologize. I'll be like, look, I am so sorry, but this is what happened. And now the villain's mad. So guess what's happening?
Oh, geez, that is so mean to your players. It's like, sorry, not sorry.
I do that a lot. I do that a lot. If I hit somebody with like a save or die spell like disintegrate, I'm like, okay, I'm really sorry, but this guy's high enough level to cast disintegrate, and there's no reason that he wouldn't carry it, so he's carrying it. So this is save or die, basically. Like I'm just
Yeah.
telling you right now. If you have any hero points or anything, you may want to use them. So in that way, I'm a facilitator, not the antagonist, not the adversary. Um,
Yeah.
but this could be a whole other uh
Yeah.
episode
Topic.
by itself.
All right, I have two more questions for you. Then
Okay.
we can kind of wrap it up.
Okay.
Question number one is my say I'm playing in this campaign where my players are reasonably strong, and it doesn't make sense for a kingdom to have guards that are stronger than my players. And my players want to do a bunch of things that are against the law. And the kingdom can't do anything about it without just sending their full army battalion. And that doesn't make sense quite either. So, what would you do in this kind of situation?
That's a wonderful question. I'm really, really glad you asked that question. I've definitely dealt with that myself. I remember way back in high school when I was about your age, a little bit older maybe. Yeah, the party got way too powerful and they could take out like small armies and there was nothing much I could do. And at that point, the campaign kind of fell apart because I was like, well, there's nothing I can do. They are gods amongst mortals. They're superheroes. Um, Luckily, because I'm a nerd and like read comics and watch movies, I've learned a lot from reading comics and watching movies. Um, a great example would be DC Comics. When Superman,
Superman.
yeah, can destroy the Earth, if he gets upset, how does the Earth react? Does the Earth go, well, I guess he can just destroy the Earth whenever he wants. Oh, well, there's nothing we can do. No, that's not what the Earth does at all. The world's governments are one afraid of him, and so whenever he goes around, people are like whispering, talking, and so the same thing. If your adventurers trash something really powerful, maybe people are afraid of them. Maybe they go to a tavern. It's not like, oh, we're at a tavern, we're gonna have fun. No, everybody's like quiet. The bartender's like, no, 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 you don't have to pay for it. Just take it. Just take it and go. Um, and then how do the governments of that land respond? I don't think the king or duke or the rulers of that government are going to let that be stand if the PCs are doing stuff that might be against them. So maybe the king sends for a high level party that's equivalent to the PCs to go be new guards. Or maybe he sends for and I'm not joking, a dragon to come, and he's like, you know what? You can take all my treasure because we're afraid of the security of this kingdom. And now these are good people that I'm talking about, quote unquote, good guys. Let's say the bad guys, the same thing. If the bad guy truly is very powerful and has a lot of resources, why wouldn't they send away for not just low level assassins, not first or second level assassins, but very high level, very capable assassins or
Yeah.
monsters or whatnot, to guard their secrets or guard their bases. And remember this: multiple things are always very, very dangerous. So let's say you had a 12th level party, pretty powerful, and they're hanging out in their headquarters. The bad guys show up with 7 wizards. They're all 6th level, so half the level of the party, but they all cast fireball at the same time. They cast invisibility. They walk up to where the party is, and all 6 of them cast fireballs. So the party is hit with 6 fireballs. That's going to be very, very, very
That's
nasty.
24d8 fire damage, or half as much on 6 successful saves.
So you don't have to be super mean, but as a GM, remember that multiples of things are always very, very bad. If they mop the floor with a dragon, okay, 4 dragons show up this time. You know, oh, that's a little different story. So multiples of things are always very, very devastating to a party, and that's what some of the bad guys are going to do. And then what happens? What can happen, or what is great for a high level game, is that it can become really role playing heavy and really political because it might become a lot of Cold War stuff. Like,
Yeah.
okay, they've gotten a flight of dragons to protect their evil kingdom. If you do something bad to the evil kingdom, there's going to be a war, and you can't be everywhere at once, and our kingdom will be devastated. Can we broker a peace? And now the adventure becomes a role playing adventure, not a trash the dungeon, get the treasure kind of magic, right? It becomes completely
Yeah.
associated with DC. So really, really, I would say read a lot of DC comics, and when you read them, like how do they deal with the super powerful characters? How do they make their conflicts interesting, right? Um, Another example would be there's a lot of things that high level adventures just can't do. So I remember in Rise of the Rune Lords, there was a great scenario and great encounter where there's a flood. Well, for all their power and magic and everything, you can't stop a flood that's, hundreds and hundreds of yards wide. You can't stop it. What if there's an
You just
entire
can't.
army of 50,000 troops all lined up against the border? Yeah, you can probably take out a large section of that army with your fireballs and lightning bolts and flying and invisible. Sure, that's wonderful. But this army is spread out over, 15 miles. You
You're not
can't,
going to be able to cover that ground.
yeah, you can't cover all that ground. And then while you're saving one village, all the other villages are attacked as well. So there are things that a high level D&D party with all their might and power, they just can't handle. They can't be everywhere at once. A hurricane, a flight of dragons, a plague that is so infectious that you cannot keep up with the amount of cure disease spells. You just don't have enough because thousands of people are infected and thousands more get affected every day. All famine, um, a plague of rats that infects the entire city.
I
Thousands and
used a
thousands of
plague of
rats.
rats recently.
So just think in terms of again DC Comics, the things that plague those powerful DC characters. What could possibly plague that for the PCs? Yep.
All right. Two things, and then we can start to wrap up. Number one is I'm not sure if I got my D8, my D6s right earlier on my fire. I just don't want to get flamed in the comments. It's 48 D6 damage
Yeah.
or half as much on
Yeah.
six successful saves. I just don't want to get flamed in the comments. Secondly, is Rush. I was asked recently where people can find you on social media.
Oh, that'll be below. In there's a Facebook and a Twitter that'll be just below in these comments, so you can find me there. And what I'm going to be posting pretty soon is a bunch of pictures and things that I do for my campaigns that
All right.
help improve them.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay, so great.
Just to wrap up.
Yes, just to wrap up.
Today we talked about session zeros, how important those are.
Yes.
We talked about communicating with the players, making sure that they are running the game that they want to play, whether that game is, basically Munchkin, just raiding dungeons and, burning down taverns and whatnot, making sure that's the game that they want to play. We talked about making sure that you're not railroading the party, but also sure that you are making the game fun for everyone and not just punitively arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also talked about when your party is really, really high level and they are kind of doing whatever they want, how would you go around stopping them? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, just one thing, which is sometimes if it's someone's brand new to RPGs, explaining to them how it works.
Yes. Yeah, forgot about that one.
But no, I think you covered it pretty good.
All right. I think that's everything.
All right, so we'll see you guys next time.